Hi there, this is Dylis Guyan and welcome to the Inspired Selling Podcast, the place where business owners who sell to bigger businesses discover how to attract, convert and retain more of their ideal clients without any of those nasty, sleazy sales tactics. And I've got to tell you, I've got an amazing guest for you today, Jeb Blount. And he is going to share his cutting edge insights on how to keep your sales pipeline and bank account full and how to become a superstar in sales consistently. And that is a word I know we're going to touch on quite a bit. So let me tell you a little bit about Jeb. He has been named one of the top 50 most influential even sales and marketing leaders. He is the best-selling author of 8 books, including Sales EQ, Fanatical Prospecting, which I have 2 copies, I just want to say, one in my office and one in my sports bag for when I'm finished swimming and I lie by the pool. Also author of People Follow You and People Buy You. He advises many of the world's leading organizations and their executives on the impact of emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills on sales, leadership, customer experience, channel development, and strategic account management. And he really is a leading authority in his field. So, Jeb, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you with us today. And you have a very prestigious CV. So tell us the story about how did you get to become the thought leader, the author, the authority that you are in your field today?
Well, it really begins with my career in business. I started young. When I was 23 years old, I was managing multiple profit centers for a company called Nutrisystem here in the United States. And then I started with a company called Aramark, which is a global outsourcing company, 250,000 employees, Fortune 250 company. And I started there driving a truck when I was 24 years old. And by the time I was 34 years old, I was the head of sales. So I was running for my region and my group. And so I went from truck driver to vice president in a span of about 10 years there. And along the way, I learned a lot about business and how business works. And my story is not dissimilar to a lot of folks who remember the 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009 melees that we were all in, and the worldwide global recession. And in the middle of that recession, my fortunes changed, like so many other people in corporate America, because we started paring down, and I had to make some career decisions. And that moment of truth made me decide that I was going to go down the entrepreneurial path rather than to get back in corporate America, which I had the opportunity to do. And I started my company, Sales Gravy, 11 years ago. Today, we are a global sales training and development company. We have 16 people working for us. Along the way, I've written 9 books. The 9th book right behind me will be out in 2 weeks.
I'll have to go and get that one. I'll have to go to Amazon and put that in my diary in 2 weeks' time.
Absolutely. And, I think that a lot of people who are in business who are my age or who went through the recession, there were a lot of entrepreneurs that came out of that. And I think that's just part of the natural cycle, is that we leave businesses and we take that DNA and we plug it in other places, or we take what we learned in business and we build our own, and then we hire people and we build the economy. And that, I think, is the story that so many people share. And like a lot of people in your audience, when I started my business, it was just me. And I was sitting in my home, drinking a cup of coffee. I went from my corner office in a big, tall building, right, with flying around on a corporate jet and with 2 assistants working for me, to getting on the telephone and literally cold calling people to try to get business. And it took me 2 years in that space to land my first enterprise level account. So I was doing a lot of mom and pop sales, smaller companies, and I in the really late summer, August of 2009, I landed ADP, and that was my first big enterprise account. And then from there, I picked up Verizon, I picked up Sprint, I picked up Edward Jones, and a number of companies. But I had to get the ball started, because that's one of the problems with selling to big companies, is big companies do business with you when you do business with other big companies. Yeah. And so sometimes when you're breaking into that first one, it takes a lot of work. And my story is really simple with ADP, for example. I built relationships with a lot of people in the middle of the company and people who had budget, and I started getting a little piece of business from them. And then I was able to aggregate that up into a larger contract with the company as a whole. And from there, we just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And that's, I think that's how most small businesses make that leap forward.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something really important there, Jeb, about, you don't have to go in and get this huge piece of business. It's about starting with a small piece, becoming known in that company, being trusted and seeing that you can deliver, and then really building on that.
That's how we work today. I mean, we're still my business is doubling in size every single year. And this year we'll probably move past the small business moniker that in the United States is a business that's, under $5 million in sales. So this year we're skipping past that and we'll be closer to $10 million in sales. And we're on a trajectory, if we can continue this, to move to 25 million in the next couple of years, just based on what we're doing. But even today, we will get into a company and pick off a small piece of that company, and then we prove ourselves and we keep working. And the truth is, where we fail is when we get into a company and we're working, we prove ourselves, but my people get comfortable and they don't keep pushing to the next level. You got to keep asking for more. The big company doesn't care about your small business. It doesn't care about, how busy you are. It doesn't care about any of those things. They care about, are you going to deliver value? And most of the people in that business that are hiring you care about, can you save them time? Can you take hassle off their plate? Are you a low risk decision for them? That's what they care about. And you and your small business, you have to step into their shoes. Now, the benefit that I have is that I work for a massive company. So I know I always recognize that from the very beginning, because I work for a really big Fortune 500 company. I understood how things get done. So it was a little bit easier for me to accept some of the roadblocks and some of the issues that you get that are so frustrating when you're working with a big business. And even today, 11 years later, I still get frustrated with the pace, how slow sometimes it is to get things done. But if you get into a big business and you prove yourself, when you get in, most of the times you stay in, because now you're the low risk. And never, ever, ever forget that when you're selling into a large company, you're dealing with a human being, and that human being is solving their own problems and the company's problems. You've got to make sure that you're handling both of those things. And if you become a risk of that human being, who probably has a salary, may have a retirement plan, has a family to feed, has a mortgage, has all those things, the moment you become a risk, you're done. Because that person is going to protect their job before they're going to protect you.
Yeah, indeed. And this doesn't just apply to getting into a Fortune 500 or FTSE, as we have here in the UK. This applies really when you're selling to any bigger business, doesn't it? You don't have to go in and get the crown jewels.
I think when we look at, we lost a proposal. We were competing, and there was a no decision in the situation. So we didn't lose to our competitor. We just lost, and everybody lost in the situation. And we went in with too much. Like, we went in and we overwhelmed them with the proposal. We asked for way too much, and it was a lesson that we had to learn. It was one of my salespeople who went in for the whole thing, the kill. And sometimes when you go in asking for too much, you don't get anything at all. And this occurs regularly. And sometimes it's worth the risk to go in and say, this is what it's going to take to do this, because your business can't sustain, a bad reputation because you bring in half a solution. But I agree with you. I think that the key is get in the door, get something. And it's, a mantra that I have with my own sales team. We do an event for a big company, and you're exactly right. It's not just Fortune 500. I mean, when I look at big companies, once they get past about $250 million US, and I don't know what that would translate into pounds in the UK, but once they get past 250, a million, there's infrastructure there, there's bureaucracy there. I love going into a $50 million company, because typically I'm dealing with a CEO and somebody can make a decision just like that. But once you get above that number, you've got bureaucracy, and it's so much easier to pick it off in small chunks than it is to go for the whole thing. So it's important that when you're when you're working with a larger business and you're going in to sell to them, that you think about what's the easiest path that gets me into this business and generates revenue. Start there.
Yeah.
And I know that like a lot of the sales, the sales books, you read sales books, like go to the top and go for everything and go to the CEO. And that's not always the place to go. Sometimes it is, but in a lot of cases, there's budget and departments where they can bring you in, but then you have the hard job of leveling up. And this is where we said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. This is where my own team fails, because we fail at this all the time. That there's nothing that anybody on this podcast is doing that we haven't done and failed at. Is that we get comfortable and we don't keep asking for more. And if you get comfortable and don't keep asking for more, you get in trouble. And there's one more thing that I've experienced over the last 11 years, and that is you get in and you're a small business and you're working with a big business and they become a big part of your revenue stream, and you like them and they like you, and it's a great relationship. But sometimes when you're starting out, especially, you're willing to go in and you go in at a rate, your whatever you're selling, whether it's a service or product, you go at a rate that's low enough to get you in the door. And then one day you wake up and realize that this business loves you and they're taking a lot of your time and they're taking a lot of your business resources, and your profit's really low. And because you've become successful and you've got a reputation, you need to move the number up. And that's a very sticky thing to do. And it's important that you, and this is the book objections behind me, that you know how to and learn how to ask for a raise when you deserve it and you're doing the right thing. And I know from experience, when you're dancing with the gorilla, sometimes that's a difficult conversation to have, but it's important for your business. And if you're doing a good job and you're doing the right thing, you should be able to ask and get more for the work that you're putting in.
Yeah. And I've got a great example of this, Jeb, and this actually was quite a number of years ago. And I got into a national chocolate company here in the UK. And my son-in-law was, in fact, the assistant chocolatier. And I asked him who I should be talking to about increasing revenue by improving the skills of the managers, the leaders. And he introduced me to this lady. And I went and spoke to her. And she introduced me to the board. And I went in and did this work with the store managers. But whilst I was doing that, I identified an opportunity that they were missing. They were missing this huge opportunity to gain corporate sales through the retail stores. And so I went to the CEO and I said, look, here's what I've identified. Here's, I put some numbers together and so on. And he said, put me a proposal together. And I ended up then, in fact, increasing my daily rate, because I was on daily rate. I wasn't putting like a proposal top line number in. And he accepted it without any hesitation because of the work I had done previously. And this was kind of a notch up. It was a different level. And then from there, I actually ended up going into their direct department where they were selling online and redoing all their systems processes, sales processes, and so on. But they would never have brought me in, I don't think, at that top level right at the outset. I had to work my way through and establish myself.
Exactly. You had to build trust. And I think that's the most important thing is, again, we go back to risk. When you're dealing with a big company and you're dealing with the bureaucracy and you're dealing with the individuals that are involved, you have to de-risk the situation. And that is your reputation. That's the work that you're delivering. And the second thing that you did there that was brilliant is you focused on a business outcome. So when you were talking to the CEO, you're showing the CEO, here's a place where there's opportunity for you to generate more revenue and profit, the language of CEOs, right? And I can help you achieve this outcome. And that's different than saying, I'm really good at this, I'm really good at this, I'm really good at this. Because if you're just selling and pitching you, that doesn't attach itself to something that's more important. And along the way, as you moved into corporate, into B2B, you're able to ask for a higher rate. And one of the things that our company has evolved into over the last few years, and really over the last 2 years in earnest, is we've moved from things like daily rate into a subscription-based relationship. We call them integrated partnerships. And we realize with a lot of our clients, the client wants our time. They want us to spend, put a consultant in place or have one of our trainers on site all the time, or they're trying to accomplish a particular goal. And on the daily rate or on a project basis, we can't deploy our resources to always be there for them. So we shifted from daily rates and project rates to a monthly subscription. I call it a subscription fee, a monthly recurring revenue model. And it's been really, really successful for us because we've moved from almost nothing. If I go back, I can look a couple of years ago, we were about $30,000 a month in recurring revenue. And today we're around $400,000 a month in US in recurring revenue on these type of models, just like you had. Like we'll ask for more. And we realize that kind of we're there all the time. So what we're able to do is two things. We're able to lower the rate that the company was paying if they paid us a daily rate. So we're able to go to them and say, we can lower your overall cost to having us come in. On the flip side, we get the guarantee that the revenue is going to be there, so that we can then take our resources and put them on that with the peace of mind of knowing that the revenue is going to be there. And if you're a small business, you know how hard it is when you have limited resources to work with a big company that has a lot of demands. So it's a model that we've used to allow ourselves to attack things like that. So once we're in, we've got this subscription model, then we're in. The reason we call it integrated partnership is now we're part of their business, very much like the chocolate company. You move and you move and you move, and now you're in there all the time. And the CEO calls you and asks, I'm sure this happened to you, hey, what should I do in this case? Or what should I do here? And yesterday I was on the phone all day long with clients who were on subscription models, from CEOs to senior vice president of HR, who are calling me up, and even founders who are calling me and asking me, hey, we're about to spend this money. What do you think? And I don't have to send them a bill. I don't have to think anything about it. This is my client, and we take care of them. And that further creates that connection because they get used to dealing with us at that level. It no longer feels like I'm nickel and diming them, or, you got to pay me so much every time you have a conversation with me. And it's shifted and changed our business. And I got to tell you, in the process of doing that, as a small business, the first couple of asks were really, how do you say this? Like your heart was pounding, like it was scary. Like you're asking for something, you don't know what they're going to say. But it was interesting how many said yes, because I think it also gives them the peace of mind that you're going to be there. And part of the learning on that was us recognizing that we had become such an important part of their business. Some of what they felt was anxiety that we might go away, that we might not take their business anymore and leverage it someplace else. So it's a benefit for both parties. And once you get into that space, then you can really start getting into the organization and applying yourself without worrying about money, right? You can start applying yourself to solve problems. And for my business, which is a consulting business, that's the greatest place in the world to be, because all of a sudden, you get requests like, hey, will you sit on our board of directors, or will you do this, or will you be an advisor for us? And at that point, you begin shaping future buying decisions because they're asking you for your opinion. And as long as your opinion is given with integrity and with the right intent, then they begin to pay attention to your advice and what you're asking, or what you're recommending that they do.
Yeah, indeed. So something else I would like to touch on, Jeb, and you mentioned it before. So a lot of companies, businesses who are selling to other businesses, will get a really good contract or a good project to work on. And so they're working on it, but they forget to work on keeping their pipeline full. So they get to the end of the project, look in their diary and go, oh my God, just before the end of the project, and think, oh gosh, now what?
Yes.
So can we talk for a moment about the importance, and I used the word earlier about consistency, of consistently keeping your pipeline full. So let's talk about that, and then how to do it.
Well, so many entrepreneurs, small businesses, especially in the service space, primarily in the service space, so I get a big contract or what have you, are, at the feast or famine amusement park, riding on the desperation roller coaster, right? So it's up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And there's there's a couple of reasons why this happens. So let's just take the human side of this. One of the reasons is that you got into the business that you're in because you love doing what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's not that you love selling, you don't like prospecting, you don't like filling the pipeline, you like solving problems, you like spending time with your clients, you like working on these projects, no matter what it is, that's what you love to do. So you get into a project and you work really hard doing something you hate, filling up the pipeline, prospecting. People don't like that, right? Going through the process, and then you get a project and you're like, oh my God, I'm doing what I love to do. This is so much fun. And your brain shuts off and you forget that there's going to be a moment when that project is over. And if it's like a 6-month project, you don't think that way. You're just thinking, what do I do right now? And if you are a solopreneur, if you're all by yourself, it gets even harder because now you're doing all the work and you're doing all the prospecting. So it's important that you create, I call it Spidey sense from Spider-Man, but you got to have this thing inside of you that is driving you to be paranoid, to be uncomfortable, that you are single focused on 1 or 2 contracts, and those contracts are going to be over, and you have to constantly keep filling the pipe. You have to get past 2 fears. One of the fears is your fear of being told no, and your fear of asking for more. And the other fear is the fear of getting too much and being completely overwhelmed. And I know that right now because we have so many proposals on the table as a business right now that if they all say yes, we are screwed because I have no idea how we're going to get them all taken care of. But that's a good problem to have, and we'll work it out. And usually the universe is on our side. So you have to think, I never quit prospecting. And we teach something called the 30-day rule. And the 30-day rule says this: the prospecting that you do in any given 30-day period has a tendency to pay off over the next 90 days. So if the moment that you quit prospecting, what you do is you impact your revenue over the next 90 days. You take a day off, it's going to hurt you. Take a week off, it's going to bite you. Take a month off, and you're not going to be able to make your mortgage payment. So as an entrepreneur, as a small business, you must always be focused on filling up the pipe. And look, if you're working on a really big project that's taking all of your team's time, just make a commitment that every morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to make 5 prospecting touches. And if you're not working on something that's pulling all your time, you get up in the morning and the first thing that you do is you make 25 prospecting touches. But you make prospecting, you make filling up the pipeline, because the pipe is life for a small business. You make that your number 1 priority every single morning. You don't start your day without prospecting, because if you don't prospect first thing in the morning, everything else is going to hit the fan, and at the end of the day, you're going to push it off for another day. And we it's a French guy came up with this back in the 1800s, but talking about eating frogs, right? So if the worst thing you had to do every day was to eat a frog, the best thing to do is do it first thing in the morning. And you got to think about prospecting and pipeline build like eating frogs. It's the most nasty thing that you can think of. No one wants to eat a nasty old bullfrog. Do it first. Eat the frog first thing in the morning, and I promise you, you will never go hungry. You will get off of this up and down, up and down, up and down, because the problem for a lot of small businesses is when they don't fill up the pipeline, they get to that point where they hit the bottom of that hill, right, the bottom of that roller coaster, and they can't get back up again. They can't solve the problem because the money issues get in the way. You still got to feed your family. You still got to pay for things. You still got to pay your bills. And if you don't have money coming in, you can't do that. And the other problem that happens when you get to the bottom of the hill is you get desperate. So we talked about de-risking earlier. When you feel desperate, you exude risk, right? You say things, you push too hard, and big companies they move at a slower pace than small companies do. So you have to be patient. You have to move people through the pipeline. And if you need this deal as bad as or worse than anything else, you're probably not going to get it. It's called the universal law of need. The more you need to sell the project, the less likely you are going to get it. So the best way to manage your emotions is to have a full pipeline. And you should never forget, especially when you're dealing with big businesses, that the human being in that conversation, anytime you're having a conversation with a big business, that exerts the greatest amount of emotional control, has the highest probability of getting the outcome that they desire. A full pipeline, a full book of projects gives you great emotional control when you're dealing and working with a big business.
Yeah. And prospecting, in your terms and mine, is not about fiddling about with social media. Now, social media is great as a first touch. Like, you might want to connect with somebody on LinkedIn. It's not just about going to a networking meeting or going to an exhibition. What we're talking about here is picking up the phone, isn't it?
Yes, pick up the phone and call people, or go knock on their door and see people. And if you go to a networking event, get a list of people, but within 24 hours, you call them all.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. Look, social media is important. I get up every single morning and spend at least an hour and a half doing social media. But I do that between the hours of 5 a.m. and 7 a.m., not when it's prime prospecting time. So it's picking up the phone. And here's a good thing. Look, if you've been in business for a while, you've done projects with your customers in the past. Some of those people aren't doing business with you right now. One of the easiest places to start, our best prospecting list are the companies that have hired us to do work for them in the past. And sometimes we just call and say, hey, how are you doing?
Yeah.
We just want to check on you. And they go, I'm so glad you called. We have some more business for you. So it is building a list, and it's picking up the phone, and it's calling people and having a conversation. And there's some frameworks. You showed them Fanatical Prospecting earlier. There's some frameworks in Fanatical Prospecting on how to have that call, how to build better messaging. And in this book behind me, Objections, there's frameworks and objections for dealing with what happens when people tell you no, or they won't meet with you or what have you. But the cumulative impact of a little bit of prospecting every day, pick up the phone and call and say something hello to somebody, it pays off over the long term. Because what happens, and this is what I mean by the 30-day rule, I may have a conversation with you today, and we just say, how are things going? Things are pretty good, blah, 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 blah. And we don't talk again for a week or so, or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but I'm in your brain. You see me on social media, something happens, a trigger event happens, you call me now and say, hey, we talked a couple of weeks ago, turns out I do have something for you.
Because you've created this top of mind thinking.
Yes.
with your various touches. Would you share your framework with us, Jeb? Because I think this is one of the things that I hear. People are, I don't know why, but there is this fear of picking up the phone. And when I ask them why, they say, I just don't know what to say. And you've got a fabulous framework in your book, Fanatical Prospecting.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, when you're calling people, you're interrupting them. And no one wants to be interrupted, and most people don't want to interrupt. I mean, if we just are honest with ourselves, if I did a survey of entrepreneurs and small business people and said, how do you feel calling strangers and interrupting their day? Most of them would say, I'd prefer not to do that. And if we did a survey of the people that you're interrupting, most of those folks would prefer that you not interrupt them. The problem is that if you don't interrupt, you're never going to get their business, because they're not going to call you. I promise you, that's not how it works. This is not a Field of Dreams moment where you build a business and then they all come. You know that to be true because you have to struggle every single day to get your pipeline full. So if we're going to interrupt people, especially business people, what we need to think about is, how would you want to be interrupted? So I don't want to be interrupted, but if I have to be interrupted, I prefer for it to be, short, sweet, and, to the point and relevant to me. One of my CEO friends calls it the 3 Bs: be brief, be bright, be gone. Right. So you want to do that. And what are you asking for? In most cases, you're asking for an appointment, or you may be asking for information about future projects that they may have coming up, or whatever the case may be. So you're looking for buying windows. So to do that, we've just created a simple framework. So let me give you the wrong way of doing things. Most phone calls start off, the reason you don't know what to say is because it starts like this. You make a phone call and you say, hey, how are you doing? And then there's this awkward silence because you just interrupted their day. And then your heart starts beating really fast because you don't know what to say. And they're like, hey, who are you and what do you want? And then the whole thing's a train wreck. You're embarrassed. And that was the one call you made this morning. You said, I'm never going to do that again because that sucks. So instead of doing that, we have to think about how the human brain works. And it's a 5-step process, and it begins with getting their attention. And the easiest, fastest way to get someone's attention is to say their name. Next, you want to tell them who you are and what you want, because the human mind abhors the unknown. And when you call up and you say hello, whatever, and you get them on the phone, they're thinking, what's going on here? So I say, the reason I'm calling, this is Jeb with Sales Gravy, the reason I'm calling is to set an appointment with you. Just pretty simple. So hi, Dylis, this is Jeb from Sales Gravy. The reason I'm calling, set an appointment with you. Simple. That takes 2 seconds, so I'm being fast. And then I want to give them a reason why. This is the relevance, because we've been really successful in helping people who sell chocolate move into the corporate space by creating logoed items that generate a lot more profit than their consumer-based sales. And I thought you might like to learn some of those best practices. How about we get together on Thursday at 2? So I give you a because, and then I ask for the time. So it's really simple. Get their attention. The easiest, fastest way to get their attention is just say their name. And then I want to tell them who I am and why I'm calling. And then I want to give them a because. I want to give them a reason to meet with me. And then when I ask for them to meet with me, it may be because I'd like to learn more about you. And I was wondering if you have a few minutes to talk right now. So we may be able to move directly into a phone call. But the whole point of it is to get there fast. So that should be 20 to 30 seconds max before you ask. Now, the key in this is asking assumptively, because emotions are contagious. So when you ask with assertion, with assumption, with confidence, with relaxed confidence, you reduce resistance and you're more likely to get a yes. And to prove this out, I was working with a group of inside sales reps 2 weeks ago. We spent an hour with them just teaching them how to ask with assumptions. Ask and assume they're going to say yes. And we spent an hour doing that. We put them back on the phone, 17 people. We had a 600% increase in their sales over a 30-minute period, from teaching them how to ask with assumption to before, where they were beating around the bush. They were like, hey, would it be okay if maybe we could get together, or would you like to buy my things? So this is the real key. And when you roll through that process and you do that consistently, what's going to happen is you're going to get more positive outcomes. Now, you are going to run into some objections, and we have a framework for dealing with objections. But in most cases, because you are a small business and it's a low risk conversation, they're either going to say, yes, I'll meet with you now, or I don't have any projects right now. And then you can say, okay, when are you going to have projects? Or when are you going to have something coming up? You can put that into your CRM or into your database, and you can create a trigger for yourself to call them at that time.
Fantastic. And the because bit is so important, isn't it? And you can use either a generic, like you've just given an example there, or you could put prospects into Google Alerts, for example.
Yes.
Where there are trigger events, there might be a merger or an acquisition, or maybe some redundancies or a new CEO, and you can bring that in, can't you, into your because, which makes it
absolutely. Sometimes we'll call and say, because we noticed I noticed that in the news that your company has just been purchased by boom, boom, boom. And I work with companies who are going through these transitions, and I have a couple of best practices I thought you might like to learn about, or we can do a specific thing. In some cases, now this doesn't really work well with big businesses, but as you work down the scale, if you're working with a smaller business, one thing that works really, really well, especially if you're dealing with a founder, is I'd like to learn more about you and how you created your business. And if you get bigger businesses, that does not work. But smaller businesses, it definitely works, because the thing that founders like to talk about the most is how they created their business. Yes. So what you have to do is start thinking about, and I love what you said, it could be a trigger event, it could be a particular vertical. So if you're dealing with an industry vertical, there are particular issues an industry vertical is facing. It could be a competitor. We're working with your competitor on this particular issue, and this is an issue that you face as well. Yeah. The key thing here is getting to yes, no, or maybe as fast as you possibly can, and being assumptive in your ask. So we're doing a couple of things, and most of this is happening at the subconscious level with the prospect. So, but mostly if you work on those because statements and you test that out, just come up with a few of them and try them, you'll find what works and what doesn't work. And when I say works, this is a probability deal. If you make 25 calls, you're probably going to get a couple of appointments. Right? You're not going to get 25 appointments. If you make 25 dials, 15 of them are going to go straight to voicemail. So there's a voicemail framework that you can use as well. But if you think about most businesses, if you got 1 or 2 appointments every single day, you're in great shape. You're going to have more business than you can shake a stick at.
I was talking to a lady last week who works for a company. She's the business development manager. And she told me how she's going through these kind of peaks and troughs. And she said, I've got quite a few in my pipeline that I think are going to come off, but they haven't, of course. And so she's had the meeting, but it's exactly what you've said. It's about getting that decision. So she's got some maybes in her pipeline. But when I asked how she's developing her business, it's social media and it's word of mouth. And she doesn't pick up the phone. And honestly, I'm like an evangelist, and I know you are too, Jeb, getting out there, trying to get people to pick up the phone, because you've got to give people the opportunity to say yes or no, not right now, or maybe no forever, but
Yeah, you gotta talk to people, and what happens in this case, she's chasing deals that are probably never going to close.
mm,
Because there's not enough in the pipe. If you're consistently putting opportunities in the pipeline, you don't have time to deal with prospects who go dark on you, or people who can't make a decision. It gets really, really easy to let those go. And there are people in this audience right now who know what I'm talking about. Look me in the eye when I'm having this conversation with you, because you are calling and calling and calling, just checking in on prospects that are never going to close, because that's all you have. If you put new stuff in the pipe, pick up the phones, the easiest, fastest way to make that happen, then those they go away because you've got 3 other things to work on.
yeah.
And we see this every day in our business. We have so much stuff in our pipeline that if something goes dark on us, we just ignore it and move on. And they'll come back at some time in the future. That'll be fine. But if you don't have a lot of stuff, it won't work. And just working on social media and word of mouth, you'll starve to death. Look, social media is important.
Yep, I agree.
But social media to me is not prospecting. It is advertising. It's marketing. For me, it's a pure marketing play. If it creates an inbound lead, great. I love that. It's fantastic. But it's more likely to create familiarity, so people know who I am. So when I call, they're more likely to take my call and take my meeting because they know who I am. It's one of the reasons why I write books. It's one of the reasons why I post so many videos or I do podcasts. All of this is about creating familiarity. But familiarity doesn't create business. Picking up the phone and having a conversation, because that's how we do business. We talk to other human beings. That's what makes money.
Yeah. And I call this, the social media bit, I call this exposing yourself, metaphorically speaking.
Okay, you could call it that.
That you're getting out there and become visible and creating that top of mind thinking. So before we go, Jeb, let's just touch on, because you've got your book up there, Objections. Let's say you have your phone call, you grab their attention and you introduce yourself, you give them the because, you close with confidence about meeting, and they say, oh, send me a brochure.
Yes. Send me some information, the greatest brush off of all time.
Yeah.
So what you have to recognize is in that moment, a lot of bad things are happening inside of you from a neurophysical standpoint. So your brain has been developed over the last 40,000 years to be super sensitive to rejection. And the reason that we're sensitive to rejection as human beings is because rejection is a good thing, in that it helps us understand where the lines are drawn in human relationships. People who were sensitive to rejection, say 40,000 years ago when we were living in caves, were more likely to pass on their DNA because they were more likely not to get kicked out of the cave into the dark where they were killed or eaten by something that was chasing them. So over the time, what human beings did was we evolved into these people that when we sense rejection, we feel something called a social threat. And social threat kicks off something inside of us called fight or flight. And what fight or flight does is it releases a whole lot of hormones like cortisol and testosterone and adrenaline into our bloodstream. That's why your heart starts pounding and your stomach tightens up and blood begins rushing into your muscles. And it's the same response that you feel if you were to face, say, a physical threat. The same exact neurophysical response happens when you face a social threat. So when you get told no, which is, hey, could you just send me some brochures? All of a sudden, in an instant, this whole process kicks off. And when that happens, and this is one of the problems with fight or flight, blood is rushing into your muscles to get you prepared to either run or stand your ground. Blood is being taken out of parts of your body that are non-essential. One of those parts, by the way, is your neocortex, because from an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't pay to think before you get out of harm's way. You get out of harm's way and then you think. That's why when people tell you no, you don't know what to say because your brain can't function. So what you have to do is create a mechanism that allows you to do what neuroscientists call the magic quarter of a second, which is essentially getting your neocortex back in executive control of your emotions. The emotions happen without your consent, but you can rise above the emotions and choose your response. So we basically use a 3-step process to do that. The first process is something called a ledge or an anchor. And all a ledge is something that you say every time. It's rote. But you say this when you face that objection, and that immediately triggers your brain, your neocortex, to say, whoa, 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 okay, this is not a social threat. We're going to be okay. And now I can get back in control. So if someone says, send me some information, one of the things I do, send me a brochure, is I go, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you are looking for more information. That's what I say. And I say it every single time. And then I say, and this is a disruptive statement. So the second piece is to disrupt. It's pattern painting. Your prospect is used to saying, send me information, or I'm too busy. And they're used to hearing the exact same words out of everybody who calls them. So I disrupt that. I go, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you're looking for information. And then I go, but the problem is that we have so much information, and as busy as you are, the last thing that I would want to do is overwhelm you with information that's not relevant to your situation. So I'm just curious, what specific information would you be interested in? Now, when that happens, when I ask that question, one of two things are going to happen. One is they're going to give me another objection. So they may say, look, I'm really too busy right now, or I'm not too interested. So we're going to use the same process in those cases. So they say I'm too busy. I go, well, that's exactly why I called, because I figured you would be busy. And all I want is to grab a time that'd be more convenient for you. How about Thursday at 2? Mm-hmm. And that's got about a 70% probability of flipping them into an appointment. But if they say, well, I'd be interested in blah, 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 that's their answer. My response is always the same. That's exactly why we should get together. That way, I can learn a little bit more about you and your unique situation, and then I can tailor a package of information that will help you make a better decision. How about Thursday at 2? Mm-hmm. Now, if you think about that, all of that has to be something that you don't have to think about, because in the throes of fight or flight, everything in your brain is turned off. And that's why sometimes, like, when you get told no, you go, oh, you don't know what to say. Yeah. Right? So you have to practice it and practice it and practice it and practice it. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about your own way of saying things, your own way of doing things, so it sounds authentic and it sounds you, and it just rolls off your lips. Now, let me be clear. This is a probability game. Just because you deliver that doesn't mean that 100% of the time they're going to say yes. I know that, when people tell me they're too busy, my too busy script works about 70% of the time. Yeah. If they say, send me some information, that turnaround I just gave you works about 30% of the time, because they're usually going to give me another objection in that situation. So you have to go through a process of learning what to say, developing it yourself, and in objections, we give you all the frameworks, and there's a whole, exercising that you can run through to build this. And you have to understand why people resist you and the neurophysical response that they're having on their end as well. But once you get all that down and you get good at it, it gets a whole lot easier to know what to say, when to say it in your unique situation. And I just want to add one more thing. Even though I just rolled through a couple of scripts with you, that doesn't mean that it works in your business, in your market segment, in your vertical. That's why we call them frameworks, not scripts. The framework allows you to have a set of rails to run on in context of where you are. So you want to go through the process yourself of building out those turnarounds, those prospecting objection turnarounds based on your unique situation.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm a great believer in practice, because you're not going to be brilliant at it straight away. It's like anything, if you're learning to play golf, you're not brilliant straight away. Like when you first learn to drive, you're not brilliant straight away. But the more you do it, the better you get. And I've got this very simple 3-step thing that I do with everything that I do, is what went well, what didn't go so well, what can I do better next time? Yes. So I'm giving myself that lift each time.
Absolutely.
Oh, Jeb, I could talk to you for 3 weeks. And maybe you would come back another time and we can talk about the actual appointment. So if people want to get in touch with you, obviously they can get your book Objections, they can get Fanatical Prospecting, and there are many other books that you've written. They can get those on Amazon. Your website is salesgravy.com.
Salesgravy.com. Absolutely. Yeah. And there's tons of resources on Salesgravy that are free. You can, if you click on the Salesgravy University, there's free webinars and courses that are there. If you click on articles, you can we just have, thousands and thousands of articles that are all free to look at. Videos are there as well. You can pick up my podcast on iTunes or on Stitcher or on Podbay or any place that you can find podcasts. It's called the Salesgravy Podcast. Pretty easy. And then you can, my email address is pretty simple. It's Jeb, Jeb, @salesgravy.com. And then I'm on Twitter at Salesgravy, on Instagram at Salesgravy. You can connect with me on Facebook. I'm at Salesgravy, or my fan page where I post most of my business stuff is Jeb on Demand. You can catch up with me on LinkedIn. I just type my name in. And then, of course, on YouTube, I post videos every single week. So there are always, 50-second, 30-second videos on YouTube with tips on selling or what have you. So, but I'd love to connect with people. So, take a moment and look me up on social, and I will expose myself to you.
Metaphorically speaking, of course. Jeb, it's been an utter pleasure. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much. It really has been a pleasure. Thank you.